in some ways it's not even one piece of software. So that's the focus of our discussion today. The conversation is about how AECs can find margin in the field. I'm Jake Freevold. I'm with Fulcrum. I've been here for about 6 years now, and one of the things that you're going to hear from me today is information that I've gotten from customers. I am not a field worker myself. I've never grown up in the field. I am not, I'm a software person. But today we're going to talk about some of the things that we've learned from our customers about how AEC firms can find margin in the field and the importance of some of the capabilities that Fulcrum brings to the table in order to make that happen. And so with that in mind, let's get started. This is a real scenario given to me by a customer where they priced out 8 hours worth of field labor over the course of multiple weeks for a given project. When he priced it out, he actually got about 6 hours of field labor in that day. One of the reasons is that the crew, although they were on site by 7 and were being paid for starting at 7 o'clock, they were struggling to get through the client's VPN to connect into the client's systems. And because of that delay, because of that problem with actually making the connection, there were 2 hours worth of field labor that were being billed to the company. The company had to pay its employees, but nobody was getting billed downstream to help account for those 2 hours. Take that one truck that this one person was working on and multiply that by the number of crews and the number of mornings that this happened, and you start to see the scope of the problem. What do we do about this major issue with getting into those kinds of field systems? And this leads us to talk about one of the costs we're not tracking, and we'll discuss in some ways why we're not tracking it, how it works out to be a cost to us and something that we're simply not prepared for. One of the major things that a lot of AEC firms have to deal with is the lack of control over the kinds of systems that they're using when they are doing work for a client. You have the connectivity from your crew to whatever network they're tapped into, the client VPN, the server on the client side, and the system that the client uses. Pardon me for a moment. Excuse me. I don't think I just swallowed a bug, but you know how it goes. The only thing you control out of this is your crew. So what do you do with respect to the crew that you have in order to gain some kind of control? Well, the customer that I was talking to about the specific situation talked about the fact that the client required them to use their enterprise asset management platform. To do that, they were required to go in through the VPN and into their server, and then that would be connected to the EAM internally. The field connectivity that they had, connecting just from their mobile devices or laptops in some cases to the network at all, right? To get any kind of network at all, was less reliable than they expected. And even in an urban environment where you expect that kind of connectivity to be available, they had multiple unexpected failure points. Crews were down. An individual crew might lose up to 4 hours a week on jobs that were running for, in some cases, a year long. And of course, because there's no way to bill for this, there's no line item that holds this cost. There was no way to account for it and to get paid for by the client. There was no SLA for the client. The client was just saying, use my EAM, and so they did. There was no way to escalate it if you were trying to get into the client and say, hey, how do we get this thing started? You were at the end of their priority list for the day because they had people shouting at them from inside the company who required their attention before. The fact that you got the short end of the stick on that didn't mean that you had any recourse to it. It's not like you could do anything significant about it because it wasn't your system. You were told, hey, you can use this. They used it, and as a result, they simply lost the pretty much the entire argument for being able to access the system or not being able to access the system. In fact, they were treated as though it was a benefit to them that they were able to use the system because they didn't have to pay for software licenses and stuff. But in actuality, it really cost them a significant amount of money. Another major issue that people face when they're using a fragmented set of client systems means that each client is built out separately. So one client is using, most of them use ArcGIS, for example. Some don't have ArcGIS behind the scenes, and then you've got to do some other shenanigans to work with them. But some will use, Maximo for their EAM. Some will use other asset management platforms. Each individual project is built out individually using the client software. That means the field team needs to learn what the client software entails. And for that first project, there's no setup necessarily because they're using the client software to do it. But every time they have a new project starting up, they've got to learn what the parameters are of the new systems that they're using. And as a result, they lose a lot of capability. And the institutional knowledge, the ability to understand why you should do one thing versus another and how these systems work together and who to turn to when something goes wrong, all of that information is lost. And there's a big reset at the beginning of any new project. Now, with a system that you control, something that is owned by you, where you're not locked into the customer systems, that's the locked versus owned part in the title there. When you own the systems, there is a certain amount of setup, right? You do have to start off with 40 hours worth of work getting everything set up. But that's done one time. And then in future projects, you end up doing a little bit of additional setup to tailor things for the specific customer that you have, but you're not doing that complete setup that you had originally. So they found, this customer, when they found that over time, as they were able to use Fulcrum repeatedly and have their own field platform where they owned the data and they owned the processes, they were able to include a great deal more institutional knowledge. Yes, there was a little bit of a reset, but not nearly to the extent that there was when they had previously used all of the customer's software. So if you want to own your workflow and own the knowledge that comes with your workflow, then you need to own the system on which that workflow gets tracked. Another major issue that they discovered was quality control. And quality control has to go along with the data, or it doesn't really happen at all. Again, working with clients, one of the things that they have, one of the issues they have with using client portals to enter data is that there's frequently no place for them to do QC after the fact. They don't have full access to that client system. So when somebody enters the data in, it's there, it's authoritative, your name is on it, and yet you haven't been able to do a proper QA of it from behind the scenes. You haven't had the more experienced people able to check the contractors you're using in order to capture the data, that sort of thing. So the data quality can be extremely, can be much worse than it would be otherwise, simply because you don't have that quality control step. And when the client controls the portal, controls the official record, controls the data, that's frequently one of the issues that customers face here. In the specific case that I was talking to the customer about, it was the EAM that had no QC. They were able to do some QC in ArcGIS because they had their own instance of ArcGIS, the geospatial data. Some of the asset information was in there as well, but anything that they had to capture in the field using Maximo Mobile or whatever software they were using, they had no real way to enter that data in a high quality way, in a way that people knew was going to be high quality. For ArcGIS, they would do an export from their own ArcGIS to give it to the client. For the asset management platform, there was really nothing there. So highly challenging. How do you manage QC when you don't manage the way that the data is captured, and therefore you have no specific place to do the QC yourself? Now, this is all really stemming from one problem, and we're getting it, multiple systems from that one problem. So when we think about that chain of events that we talked about just a moment ago, where you go from the field into a quality control step into a customer system, that chain of events only happens if the data capture happens correctly. So what I'd like to do is to make that a little bit more real by talking about a multi-step process where each step has different kinds of software being used and probably different kinds of hardware being used in order to manage the process that's going on. And I'm going to start with the fact that there's probably a person integrated into these steps as well. So your first step might include some information you capture on a clipboard because you don't have a form capture software or something that you would normally use, but there's some kind of a clipboard in place, and the software is uses a 3D camera and GIS. The second step might use GNSS capabilities or might use other kinds of software readers, like blanking on the word, but like a tag reader, and so on. There are sensors that might be in step 3. Because this is a very complex environment from a data perspective, very often there's a person whose responsibility is collecting information from all of these steps. So that first data capture that you do on a clipboard, there's a person, might not be the same person all the time, but there's a person who takes that clipboard information and enters it into the system. In a perfect world, that's not the engineer that you've sent out, because that's a high expense person, and instead this is a clerical worker back at the office. But sometimes it's also that engineer, and therefore you're spending engineering dollars on clerical labor, which is a real drag. Then you've got information coming to and from the CAD that has to get out to the field. The field worker has to capture information that's related to the CAD, so maybe they use a specific CAD mobile client to do that. Similarly with the EAM, there's information that has to flow from the customer EAM out to the person who's doing the initial work. That person collects that data, organizes it, puts it into the mobile device so that gets into the hands of the field worker correctly, and the EAM is then giving information to the mobile worker, and information is being pushed back from the mobile worker into the EAM platform. 3D cameras, same kind of things, works with the CAD, works with the person. GIS works with probably 2 different GIS systems. We see that as pretty typical. That's just step 1. Not to overemphasize how complicated this is, but that really is just step 1. Multiple penetration points into the firewall of the client, multiple different manual tasks that take place by the field worker and or this person who's back at the office. And we haven't even gotten to the point where we've proved all of the work that we need to do so we can bill, and it doesn't even start on step 2 yet. Let's talk about billing for just a second. If I've done work in step 1, I need to be able to put into my customer information system so I can bill my client. That has to show proof of work across all of these. So there's some manually typical task that happens behind the scenes to assemble all this data and put it into the billing system. A similar process that runs either in parallel or kind of aligned with this process is something that updates the project management information system, so you know where you are in the project. So there's this huge manual step just to get the information that you need from the field into a form that can be shipped off to billing and for project management, just to know where you are and to let the customer know, hey, I've done the work, can you please pay me now? And that's just step 1. Step 2, step 3, they're all the same, right? They're all major issues. So I'm going to focus a little bit on the billing and project management side of this too, to make sure that we understand where that complexity comes from. And I'm going to talk a little bit about audit as we go through this as well, because it's really the same data that needs to be available for all of these 3 things. Now, compare what I just described to using a platform that does some of this organizational work for you. All of the field tech hardware can be integrated into the platform itself, so you're not using multiple different clients, in other words, pieces of software on your phone. You're not using a lot of different interfaces that then your field team has to learn. And when you do package up the information to ship it off to the EAM or to the GIS, it's penetrating the firewall at one point just through that platform. It is allowing you to handle credentials in a systematic and highly repeatable way, and you're able to push that information into those client systems in an appropriate way using data that those client systems need. In addition, your internal integrations happen much more easily. Every one of those 3 steps will access every one of those systems that you see above, but all of the steps themselves, the processes, are being handled inside the field platform. And because those steps are being handled inside the field platform, you can take the information from those systems and put them into the field platform so that the field worker is prepared for the day. And when they're done with their day, or when they're done with a specific task, they can push all of that information back to those internal systems in a much more simplified way, giving each part of the process what it needs. let me anchor that a little bit. There are safety steps that need to happen when you're doing asset management inspections, right? So those safety elements need to be brought to the field worker in a coherent way, and they need to be brought to the field worker at the time that they need them, before they are actually opening up a pad-mounted transformer or whatever it might be. So those safety steps need to be incorporated into that process. But the safety management system doesn't need to know what the actual inspection or maintenance of that pad-mounted transformer looked like. So the process includes safety, but the safety system doesn't get the rest of the process. And the same is true with everything else, right? The asset management platform and the GIS both need to get asset information, but they don't need to know about the safety system. They don't need to know about the safety data that was collected. So the EAM is part of that data is part of the process, as well as the safety data being part of the process. But the EAM doesn't want to have that safety information in there. It doesn't need to have that safety information in there. And if you try to get the people who own the EAM system or the GIS system to add the safety steps into it, they'll rightfully tell you no, that's not their problem. So having a way to integrate safety and asset management and geospatial and project management, uh, all of that data into one place, just the stuff that the field needs to know, and then let the field use it. And as the field uses it, it's able to push that information back into all of those systems in the way that it needs to have them. That is a surefire way to make a better basis for ensuring that your processes get done, that the billing occurs on time, that you have all of the evidence necessary for each step in the process, and that all of it's coherent. You're not going to multiple places to get it. You're going to one place to get all of that information. One of the really key things that this does is accelerate billing, because now you're not trying to bill by having a person in the back pulling information from multiple different systems to give proof of work. You're pulling from one system, the field platform, and it's giving you the evidence that you need. It's giving you the process that you went through. It's giving you the photos that you took that are evidence of what you did. It will give you any exceptions that you had to deal with, any kinds of, as-built style data capture that says, okay, well, I was supposed to put it here, but I had to move it 5 feet to the right because there was a big boulder. There's all of that in one place. And because all of that's in one place, it means you can push out your billing much faster at the same time that you're updating your project management system. And when they come back and ask you for the information about what you did, you'll be able to show that to them just as easily. So maybe you're able to bill within 5 days or 7 days of getting the work done. You're batching it up in weekly batches, let's say, of stuff that you've done. You could bill at that rate. And then 3 months later, when they come back to you and say, oh yeah, that bill that you gave me in April, where's the work that went along with that? You'll be able to just draw that information out of the system from the same place that you sent it to billing, and it won't be an extra major step. It'll be essentially the same step that you went through to do the billing job. I'm going to talk about one particular way that shows up, and that is in transient work. So with a particular one client we work with, they just spoke for us at a conference about this exact problem, where they were engaged in storm response. And when the emergency first occurred, there was a lot to do just to get the lights back on. So they would do the replacement of a pole, or they would replace a transformer, whatever it might be. They would document that fully with the photos and the location where they were working, et cetera, et cetera. And that would help them re-energize the grid in the place where the re-energization needed to happen. Next, they would put in a permanent fix. Now, sometimes that permanent fix was a new wooden pole, right? They'd eliminate the reinforced pole that they had, let's say, initially, and put in a new wooden pole. And that permanent fix would then be also similarly documented to say, okay, well, we've just done the done the work to replace that pole. Maybe that pole would be a composite pole. So you originally replaced, got things re-energized with a wooden pole, but then when you did the replacement work, you put in a composite pole. I think that was actually the use case they were describing there. And the problem with that is that when you reinforced the pole, you should get paid for that work. You need to have the evidence that shows that you did that work. But when people drive by that spot, that is no longer in evidence. You can no longer see the replacement, the temporary replacement fix that was done. All you see is the composite pole. So when they come back to audit 6 weeks after the pole has been replaced, the reinforcement is gone. You can't drive by and take a picture and say, yep, this is where we did it. You can't prove it if the data wasn't captured there originally. And that data needs to be captured in a place where you can access it today. And the client's software stack is frequently not the best place to do that. So during that audit, what can you find in your system that you captured and you're able to bring to the audit versus what's in the client system? If you don't have that information, if you don't have that knowledge available, the auditors are not going to care that, you say that you did what you did. They only care what you can demonstrate what you did. So transient work and providing that auditable data is just as important as being able to provide the initial data that showed proof of work that you gave them for billing. Both of those are critically important. They come from the same set of data at very, very different times and under very different circumstances. I'm going to mention another situation which is not necessarily central to what you would do on a day-to-day basis. But if you ever work with business development, then you may find that they are also trying to use, they would like to use your data in a way that you currently are not set up to use it. So let's suppose then that business development is trying to bid for a given job and they need to put in something that's going to be competitive yet workable, some profitable for the company. When they do that, they want to get that information in some form that they can analyze reasonably and potentially organize that in a way that they can provide to the customer some examples of what you've done in the past. In order to do that, of course, they need your data. They need to understand what you've done from the field. If you don't have your own platform to do that, then the best you've got is extracts from the other systems that you've been using, right? You've got extracts from the GIS and the EAM and all those other systems that you've been using. You might have to pull that information, clean it up. There could be something wrong with some of the data that you've got, or something where there wasn't synced quite right, or something. And before too long, you're the bottleneck. They're waiting on you to be able to deliver a proposal to answer a bid. If you have your own platform, then BizDev can get that information from you in whatever formats they need. And maybe they won't want all of this data in this format, but whatever it is they're looking for, you'll be able to provide it to them. It's the same data that you provide to your clients, and it's in formats that are as easy to get as they were when you were giving them to your clients. So instead of having this overnight fire drill, you've got the ability to say, sure, you need that data, here it is, and it's in a reasonable time frame, in a reasonable format, and they're able to use it and do whatever they want to with it to sell your services. And guess what? Because the data is higher quality, because it's your data and data that you've managed and you trust, you're much more likely to get a bid that actually fits with your capabilities as an organization. So bidding, although it may not be central to what you do as a field operations manager or whatever your particular role is, that business development capability is important for making sure that you are given jobs that you can do profitably and that your company can move forward as effectively as possible. With all of these examples, essentially, it's the same problem. Without a field platform, you've got all these different things that are, none of which have a complete picture. All of them require much more complex analytics because you've got to join the information together from a lot of different types of systems. Frequently, those types of systems are built for different kinds of business users, so they don't even use the same terminology, they don't use the same semantics, and as a result, you don't have a single source of truth. Whereas with the field platform, this is your source of truth. It won't be everybody's source of truth, right? The EAM manager, the asset management platform user, sees the asset management platform as their source of truth. You feed them data and they turn it into their source of truth. But for you, if people come to you and say, what are you doing? You can say, this is what I did. I know I did it because it's in the following way. I'm pushing information where it needs to go based on the information that I have. And I am not required to get separate individual licenses for all the different possible things that I could possibly use to get my own data. I've got it. I control it. I own it. And that ownership is a huge, huge requirement for the field. Now, one of the things that makes all of this challenging is that your options can be limited, and we should be facing that, squarely. So let's do that by talking about the spectrum of different kinds of situations you'll find yourselves in. Again, what I'm speaking about here comes not from my personal experience, but from client discussions about what their situation looks like. And we find that there are really three different kinds of projects that they find themselves in. One, they are locked into that client ecosystem. They mandate what you're going to use, and you have really a very limited amount of capability to be able to provide them, pardon me, to use your own platform for doing it. The second is more negotiable. Maybe the client would like you to use, let's say, field maps, Esri field maps. They say, we understand field maps. We know where that's coming from. We'd like you to use it. Okay, you say, but I have the ability to to add in safety processes that you don't want to control, you don't want to have in ArcGIS. So I would like you to consider that I can give you a shapefile export for every single thing that we do, or I can give you a feature service layer that shows all of the data about all of the things that we've done, and I can give you that, and you can use that. You can incorporate that into ArcGIS in whatever way you see fit. If they have a preference but not a mandate, then you can negotiate with them on what you'd like to see you own and what you'd like them, what they should own and you should use of theirs. And that can vary a lot based on which systems we're talking about. In the case of ArcGIS, maybe they say, okay, you know what, I see why you're saying that. No, I really, really don't want to have to put the safety steps into ArcGIS. So I will let you use Fulcrum for your process, and you can use, you can give us the data in forms that ArcGIS can ingest. That's cool. I want you to use Maximo Mobile, though, for the Maximo side of the house. That's a drag. I'm not going to say it's good, but it's better than not having any negotiation room whatsoever. And then there are the situations where the customer just says, look, I need it, give it to me, and you can figure out how you're going to do it yourself. You control that. I like that personally, just as a management principle. You always want to push the responsibility for decisions, or pardon me, the authority for making decisions to the lowest level possible and to the people who are closest to the problem. They should have the authority and the responsibility for getting that job done. So this is the kind that works best in most situations. And because of the stack discussion that we talked about before, the ability, the platform discussion we had before, you've got the ability to control that more, which means you have less setup over time. It means your institutional knowledge grows over time. You have less rework potential because you have more supervisory capability, right? You control the point at which you can do QC. This is where you're going to get your best deliverables. And frankly, this is one of the places where you can also differentiate yourself the most strongly. One of the things that I've had multiple customers tell me is that the way they differentiate is by giving people the information back to them in more than one way. I've got a bunch of wellheads that I'm doing inspections on, true customer story. And one of the things that they do is they say, you know what, when we inspect that wellhead, that may be the first time they have really good, accurate GIS information about where those wellheads are located. Seems strange to me, but apparently those things just get lost sometimes. So being able to give them back a CSV file, right, comma separated value file, in order for people to do an import into a database that they're then going to do analysis on. Great, keeps it really simple. But being able to provide them at the same time with a feature service layer that shows where all of those individual points are is a magnificent differentiator for that customer versus other customers who do it. As a result, you can charge a little bit more because that differentiation matters enough to the customer that they will pay a little bit more for it. And you are going to be working faster. You're going to have less rework and so on. So these can be disproportionately higher margin than the other kinds of projects. You can turn the 30%, let's say, of the projects where you have complete control of the stack into the highest margin part of the business that you do. Not that you'll turn away the other business, but that's the highest margin part of what you do. And then you start to work on the negotiable side and say, hey, you know what? I see how having control of this makes my work better and therefore makes your outcomes better. So I would like to negotiate with you such that I'm going to do the following, and you're going to allow me not to use your software stack, and you'll get the following benefits as a result. So that negotiable part also becomes better the more case studies you build, more internal kind of case studies you build, the more knowledge you build on the projects that where you actually own the entire stack. With those locked projects, I'm just going to drill down slightly more on the locked projects here, because one thing that you still should remember is that the client will probably only cover the things that they need you to think about that are central to that project. So asset management is typically one of them, right? You're doing maintenance or you're doing inspections or whatever, or installations for them. They will not be covering the way that you run the operations. They will be dealing with the asset management information itself. They'll use Maximo Mobile to collect the nouns of the project, right? This asset, this location, this status. But you will be dealing with the verbs of the project anyway. So you'll be saying, here are the JSAs for the project and the safety steps that we're doing. Here are some of the consumables that we're using. We used 200 yards of wire today, or whatever it might be. I have a property where I have to interact with the customer. They don't want to know that in the asset management system or the GIS. So I'm going to track that inside my own process. And here's how I interacted with them. Here's the sign off I got, all that kind of good stuff. So there are probably many more things than the 5 I have over on the right-hand side here. But there are a lot of places where there are significant gaps in what the client systems will cover. And it's far better for you to have 3 focused apps where there's a lot of coverage inside Fulcrum, and then you're using the stuff that you're required to use by the client. It's better to have 3 focused apps in that sense than 5 overlapping ones, or 7 overlapping ones, or 2 overlap, two that you use for the client, and then a spreadsheet, or worse yet, a clipboard. So look for places that even a locked project where you can't choose not to use their software, look for the places where you have some kind of value for the platform, where you still can control it and you still can gain the efficiencies that you need and the safety that you need and so on. Look for those places to say, here's where I can control things, and that will apply to those other projects where I can negotiate or where I own the stack entirely by myself. The way to start to do this is to pick a single project type where the client relationship gives you that kind of room to negotiate a little bit, build out that workflow and document how that workflow helps. The outcomes are what's going to drive your ability to negotiate here in the future, and then use that documentation for those workflows as the internal case studies that you've got for the next conversation. Start by starting. Figure out what you can do and where those project types and which clients you can do them with, and then start to build out the business case for moving further and further into a platform scenario wherever you can, which will not be everywhere, but wherever you can. I've been talking a lot about the platform as a foundation for what we do here. I think there's a real need to step back from the everyday conversation and talk a little bit about more what the future looks like when you have a platform. So I have a 2-minute long video that I would like to share with you. And I don't normally do videos. This is strictly because this one does something that I cannot do effectively. It's about 2 minutes long, and I'm going to start it now. Hopefully, if everything works out, let's see what happens.
Take a look with me at what the future holds when our field worker puts on his smart glasses with camera and microphone and gets started with his AI-guided experience in Fulcrum. We've arrived at pole 1734. Please look at the top so I can scan for issues.
Sounds good.
I've already guided him to the right power pole. Now I'll capture some information so he doesn't have to, still under his control, of course. No visible defects in insulators or other features.
I agree, log it.
I can help him remember what he needs to do.
Guy wire tension is good.
Okay, what about the guy wire covers?
Oh, right. Covers look good as well.
Got it. Ready for the pole itself?
Let's do it.
The pole tag should read 1734. It appears to be defective. Do you agree?
I agree. It's missing the 3.
Noted. Also, some cracking, but no major defects. Do you agree?
I agree. Log it. Hammer sound test.
There's more to all this than data capture. I help capture the right data with minimal effort, seeing what he sees, guiding him through the process.
Hammer sound is good. Probing below the soil line.
Just like I can help field workers with their jobs, I can keep the office informed of relevant field information.
Northern quadrant might need a second look. What's the SOP for reinspection below the soil line?
The manual says that potential defects should be reinspected and remediated within 30 days. Should I alert the office that pole 1734 should be reinspected using a shovel, along with a pole tag replacement?
Yeah, do it.
The pole's inspected, the status is logged, nothing was missed. This is the future of Fulcrum. We're creating an AI-guided experience for every field worker. Last inspection of the day, pole 1735, 50 meters northward up this street.
Metal or wood?
Metal.
Sounds good. I'm gonna put my belt in the truck and walk over.
You're due for a water break too. It's 87 degrees.
Ah, good call.
All right, let me see if I can get my screen back again. I need to start off by saying that if you didn't already know this, that's a vision. That's not something that we're shipping today. And that's important because there we go. It's important because I can't tell you that this is the way things are going to work with glasses today. But there's a reason to start thinking about the future. And if you're trying to differentiate as an AEC firm by helping utilities think about the kinds of ways that they will improve, the way they will get better outcomes by using better technology, then we need to have this, top of mind on a regular basis. And I think the things that we've been discussing so far are actually more important in some ways than the AI. The AI depends on the things that were in the video that were related to what the platform knew, not the things that AI could do. In other words, platform is prerequisite to AI. So, for example, the AI knew which pole to inspect. Where does that come from? It could come from the EAM, it could come from a lot of different places, but it comes from, in this case, the field platform. What should you check in what sequence? Well, that's not something necessarily that the EAM holds, right? There's a pole, yes, and there are guy wires and stuff like that, but does that hold all of the individual steps that take place? If there were safety steps that needed to take place in there, would the EAM hold those? Not necessarily. So what to check and what that entire process was and in what sequence they occurred, that was all something that the AI could only know because the platform already had the sequence in it. It already had the process metadata about how things should take place. It had the verbs, not just the nouns that are in the EAM. The SOP for reinspections below the soil line, that's something that happens not necessarily in one place, but in multiple places. That SOP is something that the AI can say, well, related to this specific process, I need to pull that SOP from this EAM or from, Jenny's desktop where the PDF is stored or whatever it is, however you're storing that SOP, that's where that has got to pull from. But it has to know what you're doing. It has to understand the business context of the SOP before it knows which SOP it can go and get. And then it needs to make the right kinds of offers. People love to talk about agentic AI. Agentic AI just means the AI is going to do something for you without you having to ask for it every time first. So in this case, the question was, when should I alert the office? Hey, I should tell you exactly how to alert the office and when you should alert the office and so on. Do you want me to do that for you? And all you have to do is say yes, right? All of that was the platform. None of that was the AI glasses or the AI itself running over the top of the platform. All of those pieces of information was held within the platform. If you don't have a platform for the field, where does the AI find that information in a coherent way? Where does it find the business context and the process information necessary to know what it should be doing? So the AI can get some data from what you currently have. And yes, the vendors who sell EAM platforms, for example, are all about trying to show you the benefits of using AI as part of what they're doing inside their platforms, but they have a very limited view of what is actually supposed to be done. They know what exists, right? They know what exists, but they're not really clear on who's going to do it, why they're going to do it, how they're going to do it, the specific non-EAM aspects of what they're going to do. They don't have any of that stuff. They won't give you the, when you do a safety check on a cherry picker, they don't know that you should also be taking that safety check information and not updating the transformer on the pole that you're inspecting the cherry picker for, but you should take that cherry picker safety information and say, you know what, I've got a location, I've got an object, that cherry picker itself, I've got a status, it's in good working order and all that stuff. I can do a separate update about that particular object as well, that asset as well. And I'm going to send some information back to the EAM about that for free. I don't have to do a separate EAM process to get that benefit of that data. So it doesn't think about any of those things. So having a place for AI to work where it understands what you're doing, what the verbs are in your day-to-day work, is immensely helpful. Having the platform where all of that information can live, even though it's using information about what exists from the EAM and from the GAS and from the SMS, and is able to push that information back, having the one place where the field view of everything happening is instantiated is extremely helpful for an AI to be able to make a difference, to have an impact on those processes. So you need to own the platform, you need to capture the process metadata, and that gives AI something to build on. If you don't have a place where that information is captured, then the AI can't build any build out processes. And of course, you can't capture this information for yourself in an AI that learns about what you do if you're doing it in systems that you don't own. There are things in that video that, although it's a vision, right? That video itself is a vision of what's coming, and not all that's built out there yet. I want to emphasize the fact that there are pieces of it coming now. So you need to start building the process infrastructure now. So for example, when he said the guy wire tension looks good, there's actually technology inside Fulcrum right now where you can speak into it and it will figure out what the information, how that information should plug into the Fulcrum process that you're engaged in. You say the guy wire tension is a pass and the guy wire covers, it doesn't know yet because you haven't said that the guy wire covers look good, and it'll fill in the blanks for you on all of those different form fields while that person's talking. That is something that's shipping today. It's been production for quite some time now, and we've got a lot of customers starting to really use it and understand its value. Interestingly, one of the things that we see there is that as people are talking during their process, they give much richer data. It may not even be faster than what they do now, but they give much richer data about what's going on, and that's extractable in a variety of ways. So this is something, if you're wearing glasses and you have to talk because you're actually not typing with two thumbs, you need to be able to parse that and turn it into the business context you're in. Audio fast fill is one of the key building blocks for that today. There's something called photo fast fill, which is not yet production, but we have like a limited alpha version of it that people are using in the field right now. And it's the same kind of thing, except for capturing information visually. So if your glasses are on and you can see a nameplate on an object, then photo fast fill can read the information and say, okay, well, I've got this serial number, this model number, this manufacturer, I've got three-phase versus single phase, I've got the voltage and amperage, all that, I've got all those different pieces of information, and it's actually better at capturing that information than it is for the people who are sitting there typing things with two thumbs. The ability to capture large amounts of textual data rapidly is something that is happening immediately. Now, that relates, of course, in the video to things like the field worker being able to say, okay, it's 1734 and it's missing the 3. Like that ability to recognize that there's a defect in the text is something that photo fast fill is part of, is a building block for. But there's so much more to go here as far as vision capabilities with AI, such that you can look up and see, or take a picture of in the short term, take a picture of the the top of the pole and see if there are any insulator defects, that sort of thing. We've got a lot of people who are working on this process, kind of process right now. So this is another building block. How do we take visual information and turn it into structured information for your business process, for the field? And then finally, well, what's the how many what's the information that I need for to continue doing my job right now? Should I take a look for other field for other poles that are in this area that I can go inspect? I'm done a little bit earlier. I've got an extra 20 minutes. What can I do with my time? What are there other fields around that I can, or pardon me, other poles around that I can go look at? Being able to ask natural language queries against field data is something that field workers are going to need, but it's also something people in the office need. And as a result, we built out Insights, which enables you to use natural language query to be able to get information back from the field data that you have. Now, obviously, with the data that you've got, we want to be able to pull that information out of the field platform primarily. That's something that is currently working. You can use that in Insights today. Technically, it's still in beta, but there's a lot of capability built into that, and you can just go use it in Fulcrum. Pulling it out of the platform is straightforward. I've got the following 5 different interrelated processes that I work with. One is transformer inspections, one is transformer maintenance, and one is related to the the personnel that are being tasked on something. Get me information about all 3 of those, relate the information to each other, and report back to me based on a natural language query. That's a really cool capability that helps office workers manage things today. And as the field workers' lives change in the future, they'll be able to ask just normal questions and get results back from the AI in that way as well. One of the things that we are working toward, which is not yet available, is the ability to pull other information into Insights as well. So we can see, for example, that asset management information and pull that into a query as well. There are ways to do that now using various ways of storing the data in Fulcrum, but there may be ways to do that in a more ad hoc way in the future. Technology is advancing very quickly. We're waiting in so many ways for things to catch up to what we're trying to do here. We're waiting for the Google and Meta glasses to be field worthy. Mark Zuckerberg has to catch up to our vision on that to some extent. We're waiting for people to be able to put up MCP servers. We're already using information related to APIs and so on to make sure that we can pull together that information from multiple different systems and aggregate it into a view of what's going on, like a Fulcrum eye view of what's going on. But this capability is being built out now so that you can see the results that you saw in the video for the future. So I'm going to end the structured part of the conversation here regarding all of the concepts that we've had about where the margin comes from, what you control, what you don't, where the risk is, where the value is, where the quality of the data comes from, all those things. The bottom line is, if you are an AEC firm trying to help help your customers achieve their missions, then one of the things that you can do most effectively to do that is help yourself first. Put on your own mask before you put your mask on the person next to you. Help yourself first by managing your data as effectively as possible and manage your processes as effectively as possible in one place so that you have the ability to bill, you have the ability to audit, you have the ability to build for the future using new technologies such as AI on top of a solid framework of high quality data and process metadata. And if you can do that, then you will be able to show the value and differentiate strongly and gain the margins that you need as an AEC firm that competes in this marketplace. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and go to questions and answers. And if you have not already put questions in, then please do so now. I'm seeing a couple questions already. If there are more, then please shout out and put them into that box. But meanwhile, one question is, what if there's just no way to get the customer to let me use my own platform? This is not a technology question. This is a practical question. I would go back to what I said originally regarding the I would go back to what I said originally regarding the looking for places to use the platform. If you own the stack in some projects, then figure out what parts of that you can reuse in the project you have. The customer is probably not going to tell you that you have to use their EAM and their GIS and their safety platform and their quality platform and all the other different steps. They're probably not going to do that. So find out which ones are usable and which ones are not. And otherwise, I'm not going to argue against just living with the fact that you won't be able to take advantage of a platform in every project you're on. It's not the state of the world right now. It is what it is. I'd love you to be able to, but it is what it is. Instead, focus on those places where you do own the stack and turn those into your most profitable situations, your most profitable projects, because that's where you're going to be able to see the margins. That's where you're going to be able to make sure that you are able to grow your business most profitably. And that will be proof points when you hit a situation where you can negotiate for a bid. I've got one additional question here, which is what about risk? Risk is a very interesting question because risk is all about what you can prove. Did you do the right things to ensure that you've got your wildfire situation taken care of or your safety situation taken care of? What have you done in order to make sure that you're dealing with the possibility of those situations? And there are a number of different elements to that. One of them is to prove that you're doing the right process. If OSHA calls you up and says, hey, there was an accident, we need you to prove that you had done everything you said you were going to do, being able to prove that information, being able to pull that information out is really critical. If you are the other element is being able to understand what that risk is, right? So proving what you did is one thing. Being able to predict the future somewhat depends on good data. So just capturing everything you've done, and that accident that happened, regrettable as it is also a data point for the kinds of processes you were engaged in and how effective they were at managing safety. So that's another aspect of risk. Financial risk related to being able to install gear or equipment, or being able to inspect equipment, that sort of thing. All of those sorts of things are also pieces of information that you can use to relate to the field workers, the field teams you've been doing, what processes they've been engaged in. Are there specific pieces of hardware from specific manufacturers that come back that appear to be more risky? You can't do any of that risk analysis without data. So I hope this is what you're looking for. You asked what about risk, and there's not much more detail there, but I would say at a minimum, those two aspects of it, being able to demonstrate that you have done what you said you would do in order to mitigate risk, which is crucial, and being able to capture the data that's necessary to analyze for the risk potential that your processes hold. Both of those are really critical for our for risk as well. That is all of the questions that I have here. We're a little bit early on the event, but that's cool. So I'll give you all a couple minutes of your day back. I know that there were things that you could have done instead of being on this webinar today, so I appreciate your time. And if you do have any questions about us, we'd be very happy to discuss them with you. And visit fulcrumapp.com for any further information or to connect with us regarding this or any other topics you're interested in dealing with. Thank you very much.